It's been 2 months since the Suns lost back-to-back games, but I'm keeping the same energy today as I did the last time it happened. We'll break down why Chris Paul's absence loomed large over this loss to the Jazz, who stepped up in spite of the loss, and more on today's Locked On Suns.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Brendon Kleen, a contributor at Suns.com, as well as Dime Magazine, and a credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 5 seasons. Thank you for making Locked On Suns your first listen each and every morning. Not a great way to start the week, but we have lots to dig into. First, though, guys, a big thank you to everybody finding us on YouTube, continuing to help grow the channel over there. I'm going to give everybody one more day for the Kelly Oubre bobblehead giveaway because I've only gotten like 10 or 12 submissions, maybe 15, maybe 20. I don't know, but the odds are still pretty high if you send me proof that you are subscribed to this channel that you could get it. I mean, even if it's 15, like 1 of 15, that's like, I don't even know, 8% chance or something like that you could be the one to cash in. So get those screenshots, whatever, right in there, and we'll get that going. Thanks everybody listening across all podcast platforms as well, and you can find everything we do at Locked On PHX Suns on Twitter. All right, 118-114 final score. We'll talk about again who stepped up in spite of that loss, but we have to start with Chris Paul and the lack thereof, the lack of Chris Paul right now. His absence again looming pretty large over this game. There's two main ways that I think you really saw it happen. And those are not the only two reasons the Suns lost this game, but I do think that you can't help but come away thinking about this, I think. So today's show, guys, brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right. The number one way that the absence really showed itself, and it was actually something that I keyed into a little bit pregame from Monty Williams. I don't even think he was asked about Chris Paul directly, or it wasn't an answer relating directly to Chris, but it was about actually how the Jazz have 2 ball handlers, right? I mean, it doesn't sound super sophisticated to put it so simply. Mike Conley, Donovan Mitchell, and it helps. Right? And the Suns, in normal circumstances, have 2 ball handlers as well. They have Chris Paul and they have Devin Booker, and sometimes they might even have more than that. We obviously saw a lot of the Cameron Payne lineup with both of those guys. We've seen Mikal Bridges take that on at times, Cam Johnson take that on at times. It's not just cool to see because it's fun when guys make plays with the ball in their hands, right? It's important to the way that an offense can flow. And so you see with the Jazz, as just an example, since that's who this game was against, that they can, run a pick and roll and kick the ball out and then get the ball to their second ball handler and run another pick and roll, right? I mean, the Suns do stuff like that all the time. Most of the great teams in the NBA tend to have that. Now, there are some exceptions where, it's Luka or bust, or it's in the past, it was James Harden who might operate that way, but the best teams have that, right? And so not having that right now is really hampering the Suns. You see it and this was a big issue on Thursday and on Friday, and I wouldn't say it was as much of a problem in terms of the defensive scheme, but when Booker gets blitzed, now the Jazz don't do that a ton, but even, if it's not blitzing, maybe it's just a straight double team from outside of the pick and roll coverage. It's not the big man doing it, but maybe it is, the help side defender coming up and double teaming Booker. Any of those circumstances where he's drawing attention, there's not as much of an outlet. And Booker, I don't want to make it out to be a call out or anything, but he acknowledged that was a problem earlier in the week after Friday's game, talking about the loss to the Pelicans, where he just didn't feel like there was a decisiveness coming off of those situations. Well, When Chris Paul's there, first of all, it's going to be him getting blitzed most of the time because most possessions will start with the ball in his hands, and then Booker is the outlet, let alone, who becomes the outlet if they also blitz Booker. Like, that's not really how defense works. There's only so many bodies. So when you have two of those guys, it just makes that attention, that aggressiveness, that defensive swarming so much harder. And you're really seeing the lack of that play a role in how the Suns are struggling. And now the other part of this is Aaron Holiday was questionable heading into this game with right ankle soreness. He did play, but he was not himself. I also think the Rudy Gobert matchup for Holiday specifically is really tough considering how small Holiday is. He's already, somebody who has to use his quickness to finish at the rim. So when there's a little less quickness from the injury and a bigger presence inside, he's not going to be quite as dangerous. Plus, Cameron Payne continues to be out. So I want to acknowledge that. I also, before we get to reason number 2 why Chris Paul's absence really affected the Suns tonight, you have to give it up to Devin Booker. I'll obviously give a humongous round of applause for a 37-7 on 50% shooting from the field, 50% shooting from three. There's no caveats. There's no more you need to add to that to acknowledge and tip your hat and celebrate an insanely incredible performance, just given the pressure on him and everything else. But that's the reason that it is extra impressive, is that pressure. And I mean that in the literal sense, not just the psychological or emotional pressure, but the literal defensive pressure I was just talking about. To have that stat line, to shoot that well from the field, but most importantly, to only have 3 turnovers. And for the Suns as a team to have less than 10, only 9 turnovers in this game. That is the exception to the rule that I'm talking about. That is an area where you are not seeing the absence of Chris Paul make a massive difference. The Suns are spreading the wealth and they are surviving for the most part, but there are just these moments where they don't quite have the firepower to create great shots because Chris Paul's not in there. Because if the defense keys into Booker, then he's going to give it up. He'll make the right play 9 times out of 10, but it just makes things limited. The other part, number 2 here, is that late in games especially, or late in the clock or whatever it might be, the Suns don't have an incredible, no doubt about it, go-to shot, right? Because for the most part, Booker's no doubt about it, late in the clock, I got to get something. What am I going to? That's a mid-range jumper for Booker. And not only is it a mid-range jumper, but it tends to be fairly iso ball, dribble, Kobe, T-Mac type of mentality, Kevin Durant, and he's not as big as those guys is one part of it. I mean, Kobe maybe a little, but it's just a tough shot. Aside from that, even if you are Kevin Durant, that is a tough shot to rely upon. And that's part of why Kevin Durant gets the respect that he does, because he can make it. But Book, he can make it, but it's not the type of thing that opens up opportunities for the rest of a team, I guess is my point. And what you lose with Chris Paul is the snake dribble, mid-range, fadeaway, pull-up jumper that he has mastered. It is better, I think, as the engine of an offense late in the game, because you're organically involving other players, right? And Monty Williams has been a genius with how he has orchestrated other stuff to be going on while Paul has the pathway to that shot. First of all, you have to have somebody screening for you. Second of all, the Suns have these cutters and they have these off-ball screens and they have guys lifting to space the floor up to the wing slot area of the three-point line like Jay Crowder has gotten. So there's so much going on that Paul being able to make that shot creates an impossible. It beats the defense into submission in a way. You're making them rotate and react to too many things at one time. Booker's go-to offense late in the game, because he doesn't have the same amount of reps as Chris Paul, because he doesn't have the same passing ability and everything else and vision and feel as the Hall of Famer does. It's just a little different. It's just a little bit, maybe 5-10% lower. Now, of course, again, you have to tip your hat to Devin for making the shots late in the game that he did, including the 3 that put the Suns within 1 possession late in the game prior to the Jay Crowder turnover. But that is a big thing. I actually have one more. That leads us right to it. I want to talk about the Jay Crowder mistake late in the game. And that's one more area where they are missing Chris Paul. So I lied to you guys. It was actually 3. Let's get into it. First, though, guys, today's show, as I said before, brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net has you covered across all sports, across all seasons. So football might be over, but basketball is in full steam. We have the tournaments not too far around the corner. So from all the latest odds, totals, player performance props, to where the next fired coach might land, BetOnline.net is the #1 spot for all your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline.net is your source, your #1 source for hockey, boxing, and the UFC. Head to the website today to use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and actions sweeping across the sports landscape and get into that action. BetOnline, where the game starts. I didn't want to start things on too negative of a note, but obviously to close out the Chris Paul thought there and to get into a little bit more of the meat of what happened in this game, you had obviously the turnover late. You have a made 3 from the right wing by Devin Booker, as I said. And then after that, you have a stop. You have a stop by the Suns that ends with a rebound. The ball goes to Jay Crowder. He is looking to get the ball to Book. Everybody's looking to get the ball to Book. And the Suns just failed to do so. I don't want to say that it was a grand failure. It wasn't that big of a deal, but just as Monty sort of realizes that it's perilous for Crowder and starts to gesture for the timeout in a more attentive way, that's when Jay throws the pass to Booker, thinking that he can make it, and the ball just sails over his head. Obviously, he was worried about the bodies between him and Book. It was, one side of the court to the other, but he sails it. And of course, if you're talking about ways that Chris and his absence affects things, you would think that the situational awareness of that moment is better if Chris is out there, the coach on the floor, the veteran, the sage vet, whatever. And to his credit, Crowder took full ownership of what happened. But the biggest way to sum it up, in my opinion, and not spend too much time on it and dwell on it, because many, many plays make up a loss like that. And so this one gets attention, it gets the spotlight, but I didn't start with it because I don't think it's the only reason the Suns lost. I think Chris being absent in all those other areas really hurt them. But the way to sum it up to me is Book said, I could have called the timeout. Right? So yeah, we can criticize Crowder for the turnover. Maybe Monty, as he took ownership of as well for his aspect of it, like run out to half court and make the timeout happen, right? Don't allow the moment to come to you. But at the end of the day, anybody on the floor could have gestured for that timeout, and they didn't. So you would think Chris might, even if the ball was trying to find him and he's seeing Crowder struggle, he probably, hits that timeout sign and gets it for the team. So obviously that was a crucial moment, a bright spotlight type of moment, but that's not the only reason that the Suns won. Those other things played a part in it as well, but I don't want to dwell on the negative too much. Let's get into a little bit more of the positive here, specifically Cameron Johnson, who played another 35 minutes tonight and was a major positive for this team. But there's a lot of layers to what's going on with Cam right now. So just off the top, this was his 13th season as 13th game as a starter this season. He is now averaging as a starter for the Suns this year, 17.5 points, 49% from 3 on almost 8 attempts per game, and 54.1% from the field. Just incredible stuff. He has been excellent no matter what the situation, but particularly good, it feels like, especially offensively, when he is a starter. I also want to highlight that he was that lineup now, the current starting lineup with Point Book there and the 3 wings and Ayton, is plus 10.9 per 100 possessions on the year. And I think that was heading into this game. I don't think those numbers have updated. They were excellent again when they were on the floor. The Suns outscored the Jazz pretty thoroughly when the starters were in there. It was really the bench where they struggled, especially the minutes where I will say DeAndre Ayton was off the floor, actually, when JaVale McGee was out there was a big one. But anyway, the plus 10.9 with the current starting lineup is amazing. I mean, it's great for a lineup that you're really leaning on and that is unorthodox for you. It's better for perspective. Again, the old starting lineup, the normal starting lineup, has played like 10 times as many possessions together, but that lineup is only a plus 7.1 on the season. So plus 10.9 for this new starting lineup is excellent, and Cam is a big part of that. But in terms of ripple effects, you see a few. So one is to flip back to the ball handler thing. In this game, you saw Mike Conley, not excellent by any means, only 13 points, 5 of 13 from the field, more turnovers and assists, and Donovan Mitchell out there. But especially when Mitchell and Clarkson were out there, which was a lot of the fourth quarter, Clarkson led the Jazz in plus minus tonight. So when Clarkson played, they were excellent. You're in situations, especially if you're switching, which the Suns tend to do 1 through 4 a lot, is you're having Cam have to defend some of those guys. And you're also having Jay have to defend some of those guys. That is the nature of this wing heavy lineup. You're seeing different moments where you might have a matchup you don't love. You might have a situation you don't love defensively. I don't think that Cam has necessarily not risen to that moment, but it's just sort of worth kind of looking at the ways that falls. I also think the rebounding tends to be a little bit more by committee, and that can go either way. You don't necessarily have as many minutes with Torrey Craig out there. You don't have as many minutes, like we see sometimes where Ayton is on the floor with another big. Like there are some of these secondary ripple effects, but I would say the main one is that the bench is worse. Even with Holiday playing today, hobbled as he might have been, you got very, very little from the bench. 11 points, and nobody on the bench had a positive plus minus. And I think a big part of that, a big reason for that, is that Cam Johnson is not out there to help them. So we all, I think, tend to look at the Cam thing through the lens of like rooting for him to continue to grow. And will he take Jay Crowder's starting spot? Will he close games? What is his growth pattern looking like? I don't necessarily have an answer for any of that, but I do think it's worth acknowledging that ripple effect. And I think that it takes us into the next logical place, which is to check in on the rotation, check in on the minutes and everything else, and talk a little bit about do our bench mob vibe check here. I will just say, I think it's on the Cam Johnson note. I think it's time. I think it's well past time to start to give Cam Johnson the ability to run a few pick and rolls every night. Like more consistently, make it a priority to do it, especially with Chris out. They've done that with Mikal Bridges. They've done that actually even with Jay Crowder at times this season or this week since Paul has been out. I don't. It's weird because Cam already has had 5 assists tonight. Like, I don't want to beat a dead horse there and act like it's not already happening. But I think that we have not seen the ceiling of what it can be when he's given the ball and plays our run where the ball is in his hands. I just think it's worth trying, and I don't think he's going to make the wrong decision. I don't think it's going to kill you. So I think you owe it to him. You owe it to yourself as a team to mix and match and explore there a little bit more. And I think tonight was just, another night for him, which speaks to a great performance, a great consistency by him already. But let's talk about how the other guys did and what could change for the bench as Cam Payne nears a return and what we saw overall from this rotation. First, though, guys, today's show also brought to you by Built Bar, my favorite protein bar, the best protein bar in the world, and the cure-all to your New Year's resolution struggles, because we all are in that rut. We're headed toward March already. Things are getting crazy in the world, to put it lightly. Maybe this Suns situation has you down a little bit, and the last thing you want to do is put some green beans in your face or go to the gym for the fifth time this week, heck, the second time this week, the first time this week. But Built Bar can make all of that easier because they are delicious. They are easy to eat. They're easy to fall in love with. They have a flavor for everybody. So check out the old classics: mint chocolate, raspberry, strawberry, whatever you love. There is a flavor for you. Double chocolate, that one's a wonderful option as well. And Built Bar Puffs are changing the game as well. Puffs are the first protein-infused marshmallow. They're fluffy, they're light, they're delicious as well. Covered in 100% chocolate, just like every Built Bar is, and delicious flavors through the roof. Cinnamon churro, coconut marshmallow, or my favorite, lemon cheesecake. All of them, the classic, the puff, whatever you get, packed with protein, 15 to 20 grams of protein, no more than 5 grams of sugar, and no more than what, like 160, 170 calories. You know it's light. You know it's good for you. You know it's going to give you the power that you need. Go to belt.com, use the promo code LOCK15 to save your New Year's resolutions and get 15% off your order when you do. That's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. Checking in on the vibes of the bench mob vibe check, as we like to do on these recap shows. A few observations. One is something that I guess I'll just have to pay a little bit closer attention to, which is why Torrey Craig hasn't played as well since Chris Paul has been out. I don't typically think of those two guys as being intertwined all that often. I don't really feel like Torrey is, maybe it's not playing with the starters in general quite as much. Again, as I was saying, one of the ripple effects of Cam being in the starting lineup is that Torrey is playing with some less potent offensive lineups, more based on energy and just kind of making life easier on themselves when he's out there rather than having as much structure. I don't necessarily know, but he has been really, really quiet offensively since returning from the All-Star break. So hopefully that can get back on track. We'll have to kind of maybe put a microscope to that at some point soon. Landry Shamet, I don't have a lot more to say. He needs to be more involved. But the big thing to look out for on the horizon is Cameron Payne's return. He's been straight up out in all 3 games since the break after allegedly being, on track to return by the Thunder game coming out of the break. Don't want to read too much into that. That was never from the Suns. That was just reporting. But he went through what looked like pretty close to a full warm-up prior to the Jazz game tonight. And the Suns now have 2 games off in a row before they play Wednesday against Portland. So, if he can return, it'll be, needless to say, huge. And I think it starts to change quite a few things for this team. One is, does he start? I think I would tilt toward starting another more traditional point guard and putting Cam Johnson back to the bench. That would be, just based on what we've seen, I just think that the Suns they're making it too hard on themselves to score, to orchestrate and just kind of bring order to their offense by putting Book at that one spot to start games. I don't think that it needs to be that difficult. And I think if you had a point guard in there, another ball handler in there, as I've talked about several times now, things would just be a lot easier. There were just a lot of moments tonight, and it's hard to pick nits. Obviously, the defense was a big problem as well. Allowing Donovan Mitchell and Jordan Clarkson to go off the way that they did on those pull-up threes, pull-up jumpers. I just have a hard time reading too much into that. I think if the Suns have been able to just calm things down, score on their own, especially, in that fourth quarter, I just think things would have been better. And maybe that's a crazy read to have in a game where an opposing team had 2 30-point quarters on you. But to me, that was a big problem. And I think you need another orchestrator in there. I also think back to some of the defensive stuff where you're having some moments where there were a lot of situations in this game where Jay Crowder was guarding Donovan Mitchell in isolation in sort of, not clutch moments, but important moments where you felt like the Jazz needed a shot. The ball was in Donovan's hands and it was Crowder out there. I just think you feel more comfortable if you can have Payne, somebody a little bit more like-sized, somebody who can slither around those screens. And that's never been a huge strength of his, but he's more suited to it than Crowder is or Cam Johnson is. And I think things fall into place. So I really think that's an important step here. I feel like Monty hedged a little bit when I asked him about it on Thursday night, if we expected that things might change if Cam Payne came back, etc. He said, I don't know. That wasn't a no. So to me, part of what I feel like is happening here is that the Suns also were expecting that Cam Payne would be ready right out of the break. He wasn't. They had to adjust. They went to this point book thing as a little bit of an experiment. I think that their preference would be to have Payne in that starting lineup. I think if he's ready Wednesday, whenever he does come back, he will be in that spot. And I think a lot will fall into place. One last thing to look at, and I don't have a great name or segment for this. We have to talk about Deandre Ayton. Excellent energy, excellent attacking mismatches when the Jazz did switch. One of the best things the Suns did offensively all night was to push the tempo. When they were able to turn defense into offense, when they were able to just get the ball up the court quickly, they scored at an incredible level. Ayton was a big part of that. Catching lobs, sealing in the post, just cutting to the basket, all this stuff. 11 of 15 from the field kind of speaks for itself. What he wasn't doing was that he was not rebounding. You can't have a game where Rudy Gobert has 14 rebounds, double the amount that your starting center has. Not to mention that Hassan Whiteside had 8 of his own as well. Yes, the Jazz only won the rebounding battle by 5. Defensive rebounding was fairly similar, but the Jazz had 4 more offensive rebounds than the Suns did, and a big part of that was Rudy Gobert. I mean, you take those second chance points away, and it's easy to see how this game could be pretty different. Then you're just having the Jazz rely a whole lot on the 3 ball and not able to really control possession. So Ayton just needs to rise to that moment more. He has been excellent against Gobert in a lot of moments throughout his career. Gobert also got to the line 8 times, and Ayton had 3 fouls. So that matchup heavily tilted toward the Jazz, and that was a big part of why the Suns did not come away with the W as well. However, to close out here, Ayton did have, for the first time in his career, a second straight game where he had a made 3-pointer. He has never had back-to-back games with a made 3. I'm not wasting any more breath on Ayton shooting threes. I feel like for 2 straight years we talked about it with this guy. I just don't think that's his game. I don't think that he has the comfort level to do it. I'm not going to talk about it until it becomes a bigger thing, but it is just an interesting little tidbit there that he's even taken one in back-to-back games. You could see the idea, like, let's bring Gobert out behind the arc, but he didn't stick with it. It wasn't really a threat the rest of the game. So it's just part of the learning curve. I think it's part of the adjustment period here with Ayton, without Chris Paul, for Ayton, for Booker, for everybody. That's the theme of the show. I mean, it's going to be the theme of a lot of shows for here on out as this team settles down and settles in. But more to come. One more game this week, I guess, during our show recording days. The Thunder or the Blazers on Wednesday. I will actually be taking Wednesday night off from the show. We'll have to see how things go this week. I'm traveling for work, so I'm usually good to miss 1 show per month. I hope you guys will allow me that. So I will not be recapping the game in real time on Wednesday. What I might do instead is do an early show Thursday, and you guys can get that sooner rather than me waiting until Thursday night to post like I normally would. We'll see. We'll see what I come up with there. But that's the plan. Thanks for making Locked On Suns your first listen every day, guys, and I will talk to you tomorrow.